Hi, I'm Chris Clark, publisher of NACD Directorship magazine, and on today's BoardVision, I'm going to have the pleasure of speaking with Mary Ann Cloyd, leader of PwC's Center for Board Governance. Welcome, Mary Ann.
Hi, Chris. Thanks. Great to be here.
I'm glad you could make it. The focus of the 2020 program, which PwC is part and parcel of, and thank you very much, is really a forward-looking initiative. And in a sense, we're being futurists. We're gathering subject matter experts, directors, academics to anticipate the resources, the tools that directors and management will need not only in 2014, but all the way to 2020. And, to my mind, the initial gleanings have really said to NACD and myself that it's really time to change the narrative in a dramatic way. You were there, you were participating, you were leading. What other things really struck you?
Well, I think, Chris, I would start with the fact that I was really excited when NACD came to PwC, to us, as an opportunity to partner in this, because I think you're exactly right. I think that when you look at the fact that the spotlight that boards are in today, to think that governance doesn't need to change would not be the right attitude. So I think that what we see, and in answer to your question, what I see is this is an opportunity to really start the dialogue, to have directors thinking about what needs to change in the process of governance, or what else needs to be shared about the process of governance, because there's a lot of people out there asking about how this works and seemingly lacking the understanding of how it works.
One of the two main topics at this gathering, and we had a number of people with us, one of the main topics was asymmetric information risk,
yes.
As I call it, AIR.
Clearly from what we heard at 2020, and again I really give credit to Ken and Peter for giving this a label, because I think asymmetric information risk is not something that's new, but I think that people haven't talked about it in that way. And so if I step back, so it's possible that we have some people out there saying, what is asymmetric information risk? As a board member, you need good information to complete your oversight duties, or to carry out your oversight responsibilities. And one of the real challenges is, how do you get that information? Your job isn't management. So management in their day jobs has a ton of information. Right? I mean, and they should have that information. They need that information to run the company. But how do I, as a board member, ensure, what do I need to do to be able to, one, I guess in the most extreme negative case, ensure that I'm not being managed by the information that's coming to me? I think that would be hopefully the exception, but in its broadest sense, how do I ensure that I'm getting all of the information that I need, but not so much information that I can't possibly process it, that, buried down in this 100-page, the right information at the right time.
There's one way as a director you can be helpful, thoughtful, and solve challenges in the future, that if you're not intimately involved in setting the boardroom agenda, you really should be. But that was tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, it was the tip of the iceberg, and I think one of the really interesting discussions that was around that topic, and again in trying to focus it, the question was asked at this session, if you could only identify one metric that you wanted to measure, right, what would it be? And I think that was a very interesting way of trying to frame this challenge that you're describing, because what it forced is a lot of good dialogue around, and thoughtfulness around, well, boy, if that's what I had to do, how would I do it? How do you define a metric that really gives you insight into how the culture of that company is operating top to bottom? And I thought a great example that came up on that was a director who said, well, for me, I've got an idea in my industry, and it happened to be energy. He said it would be a safety metric. Because, we start every meeting in the company, whether it be at the board meeting or a management meeting, starts with a discussion about safety. And as we talked through that, what you saw is, that really does give you good visibility. I mean, it applies to your customers in terms of measuring safety. That tells you whether or not that company culture has been driven down to the lowest levels. One of the challenges with 2020 and how we continue to take that board dynamic forward is, how do you stop the old thinking? How do we not just continue to have the same discussions where we're asking the same questions that get to the same answers?
Well, let me ask you this, because I probably jumped right over this, not on purpose, but there was a point that the boardroom, being that petri dish, it's not always conducive for directors challenging management in the information or the data they present. So I think you were speaking to that to a degree. I don't know how you do it now or in the future to make that environment more conducive. Maybe you do. I wanted to thank you and PwC for giving us this highlight recap of the first meeting. Is there any other nugget you want to share with our members, and actually, quite frankly, the directors who are our members?
Well, again, I think it's I would close by saying, again, I think this is looking at the right thing, and that's to be thinking about how boards have to continue to adapt and change to help increase that public trust in boards, because candidly, I think some of that is missing right now.
Mary Ann, I know you're going to be back. What are we going to talk about next time?
You know, what I would really like to talk about next time, Chris, is I'd really like to continue this dialogue that we're talking about metrics. You know, we talked about it a little bit in this episode, but I really think there's more we can cover there.
That's great. On behalf of PwC and Mary Ann Cloyd, I'm Chris Clark, and this is Board Vision.